peeled and boiled the sweet potatoes and then smashed them up, and I'll show you smushed them, and I'll show you the smusher in a minute. Okay, there's this. Don't run away with the smusher. Okay. And we didn't have time to make the pies the day that he boiled these and smushed them, so we stored them in the refrigerator. And so here's a bunch of smushed sweet potatoes. And it takes about 10 minutes at 350 for these to be ready. I don't want to burn them, but you do want it to cook a little bit. Now, we will pre-cook these and then freeze them so that all we have to do later on is take them out and heat them in the microwave, and they're good to go. This is cooking ahead and freezing. All right, these go in the oven for about 10 minutes. Reason you put air holes is so that as it's baking, it's going to expand. There's air bubbles and things going on inside the pie crust, so you want to give it a place to expand. And if I didn't have the little holes, I'd have big old bulbs of pie crust poking up. Okay, even though this is sweet potato pie, here's a pumpkin pie recipe. That's what I'm going to use. Switch over here, and in cook. Okay, use 2 cups. I've been using 2.5. This is such a flexible recipe. You know, it doesn't matter. As long as it tastes good, that's all that matters. In cooking in bulk, the recipe calls for 2 cups for this one recipe for one pie. We cooked a whole bunch of sweet potatoes, or my uncle did rather, and I know that there's about a gallon of mashed sweet potato, because that's how we stored it in the refrigerator in a reused ice cream gallon bucket. So that's roughly 8 times the recipe. This is about 2 cups worth. I can look at that and say, okay, that's roughly 8 times. That's good enough. I'll test it along the way. I'll taste it and make sure there's enough seasoning, but I am not taking time to measure. Calls for 1.5 cups of undiluted evaporated milk or rich cream. This we've determined is about 8 times the recipe. So notice that there is some liquid in here from the sweet potatoes. So I've got to account for that, or at least anticipate that. So I'm only going to put, instead of 8 little cans of evaporated milk, I'm only going to put 6. I can always add to it, but you can't take it away. You shake your can up before you start, which I have already done. Poke 2 holes because that lets air get in and push the liquid out, in case you didn't know that. I actually stopped at 4 cans of evaporated milk because it just feels like I needed to stop. That's part of cooking. You start developing your senses of what feels right and what doesn't feel right. Okay, so with the evaporated milk in, I kind of know how juicy this is. And before I add 16 eggs to this for 8 times the recipe that calls for 2 eggs per making, I certainly don't want to put a bad egg in there. So this is an easy precaution, is you break it into something and you can learn to look at it real quickly and it smells fine, because it would be such a waste to put a bad egg into all these other ingredients and thus waste it. And with commercial eggs these days, that's 3, it's wise to be careful. Okay, first thing is to break up the little egg yolks, and then I could use a whisk if I wanted to. I could use a mixer, but I enjoy doing it this way. On the floor. This stoneware crock is a cake crock. It belonged to my great-grandmother. I'm not sure exactly how old it is. It does have a number 2, ouch, on the side of the container. If I turned it over, I might be able to see a marking about who made it. I'm not going to turn it over. It has been in my grandmother's kitchen, my great-grandmother's kitchen, my grandmother's kitchen, my mother's kitchen, and now my kitchen. 4 generations, and we have all used it to hold sugar, even though it is a cake crock. So 4 cups. 1, 2, 4. Calls for a teaspoon of cinnamon. As you can see, I'm using the Justin Wilson School of Measuring because I think we probably need a little more cinnamon than, and I've forgotten what that was, so we're just going to assume that's about right, because I've forgotten how many that is. calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, so that would be 2 whole teaspoons. Again, the Justin Wilson School of Measuring. Okay. Calls for a 1/2 teaspoon of ginger. That's going to be 4 for this quantity of sweet potato pie. I know, that was 4. I can't help it, I have to put a little extra. You've seen cooks measure things in their hands, okay? If this recipe calls for a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, this is a 1/2 teaspoon by exact measure. That's what it looks like in my hand, okay? So 8 times that, that means I need 4 teaspoons. 1 or 8 of these. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, in my joy of cooking, it doesn't call for vanilla, but I like vanilla. So I'm thinking this will be about right for 8 times the recipe. I also like lemon juice to bring out some sparkle in a recipe. The recipe doesn't call for it, so I'm just going to add sparkle. And then stir and stir and stir until I get it really well mixed, and then it's a matter of just spooning this into the shell pie crust that have baked for about 10 minutes. We'll show you that in a minute. But this is the part where you get to think about times past and future and enjoy the art of cooking. It's when you do a lot of stirring. Matter of spooning the sweet potato mixture into the pie crust, and see what I meant about the pie crust will puff out because I didn't have a hole there, but it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to know it. So you do this until you run out of pie crust. And hopefully I've got enough pie crust. We get the industrial strength, heavy duty aluminum foil from Sam's Wholesale. Takes us about 2 boxes a year. So what I've done is tear off some little strips. It's really kind of better if they're about this wide. Fold them in half. And I'm going to cover my edges while this bakes. That will protect your pie crust from getting too brown around the edges. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be pretty. It just has to cover. Okay, that goes in the oven. In the oven, they'll cook for about an hour, and here are 2 left over. We actually have more of the filling that we've put in a container to store in the refrigerator until we can get some more pie crust at the grocery store.